Well, I think I know what brings you here tonight, and that's to listen to some good old horror stories. Well, welcome to Whispers from the Campfire. Grab some marshmallows and a blanket and get comfy, as we have 3 horror stories for you tonight to prick the hairs in the back of your neck. So join us for our first story. The first story is of Blackwood Cabin, a place where the forest itself seems to whisper secrets of the past. It all begins with Jack, a seasoned hiker and nature enthusiast. Jack was no stranger to the wilderness, having spent countless weekends exploring trails and camping under the stars. But one summer, he decided to take a solitary retreat, far away from the beaten path. His destination was Blackwood Cabin, an old abandoned log cabin nestled deep within the woods. Locals warned him against it. They spoke of eerie occurrences and unsettling disappearances associated with the cabin, but Jack, a seasoned hiker, dismissing them as mere folklore, and so he pressed on. Jack arrived at the cabin as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The cabin was in disrepair, its windows shattered and door barely hanging on its hinges. But Jack was undeterred. He set up camp inside, laying out his sleeping bag and lighting a fire in the old stone hearth. As night fell, the forest around him came to life with the sounds of nature. Crickets chirped, and the occasional hoot of an owl pierced the silence. But there was something else too, a faint whispering, just at the edge of hearing. Jack tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the wind or his imagination. But the whispering grew louder, more insistent, until it seemed to echo within the cabin walls. He shone his flashlight around, revealing nothing but the old wooden beams and dusty floor. Determined to get some rest, Jack lay down and closed his eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. The whispering persisted, and now was accompanied by soft thudding noises like footsteps pacing outside the cabin. Jack sat up, heart pounding, grabbed his flashlight and ventured outside, shining the beam into the darkness. The forest was still, with only the movement of the swaying branches in the wind. He saw no one, but the feeling of being watched was undeniable. Returning to the cabin, Jack bolted the door and settled back into his sleeping bag, exhaustion finally overtaking him. He drifted into a restless sleep, plagued by nightmares of shadowy figures and whispering voices. In the dead of night, Jack awoke with a startle. The whispering was louder now, almost deafening, and it seemed to be coming from directly beneath him. He felt a cold draft seeping through the floorboards. Heart racing, Jack got up and investigated the source of the draft. He noticed a loose floorboard in the corner of the cabin. With trembling hands, he pried it open, revealing a small, dark compartment. Inside, he found an old, leather-bound journal. Flipping through its pages, Jack read the diary of a man named Elias, who had lived in the cabin over a century ago. Elias wrote of his descent into madness, driven by the incessant whispering that plagued him night and day. He spoke of a dark presence in the forest, an ancient spirit that demanded a sacrifice. The final entry was the most chilling. Elias described the ritual he performed to appease the spirit, ending with a warning. The forest demands its due. Leave while you still can. Just then, Jack heard a loud crash outside, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching the cabin. He could feel the presence now, an oppressive weight that pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. Panicked, Jack grabbed his belongings and fled the cabin, the whispering voices following him into the night. He ran blindly through the forest, branches clawing at his clothes and face. Footsteps pursued him, relentless and unyielding. By the time Jack reached the safety of the main trail, the whispering had ceased, and the forest was silent once more. He never looked back, vowing never to speak of what he had experienced. But the tale of Blackwood Cabin lives on, a chilling reminder of the ancient spirits that dwell within the forest. So if you ever find yourself hiking in those woods and stumble upon an old abandoned cabin, remember Jack's story, and whatever you do, don't listen to the whispers. So if that story wasn't quite enough for you, then join us for our next chilling tale about another intrepid adventurer. Join us for St. Mary's Church. Claire Morgan was a photographer with a fondness for the eerie and the abandoned. She travelled across the country, capturing the desolate beauty of forgotten places. Her latest subject was the old St. Mary's Church, a once grand structure that drew in the local worshippers for service, now left to decay in a remote part of the countryside. The church had been abandoned for decades, its congregation having mysteriously vanished one stormy night, and the mysterious disappearances remain unsolved to this day. The locals whispered of curses and restless spirits, but Claire dismissed these as mere superstition. She arrived at the church just as the sun was beginning to set, the sun's golden glow dimming and fading behind the church. Claire became eager to explore and document its forgotten halls. As she stepped inside, a sense of profound stillness enveloped her. A heavy cloud of dust danced in the last rays of sunlight, filtering through the stained glass windows, casting eerie patterns on the cracked stone floor. Claire set up her camera and began to shoot, the click of the shutter echoing in the silence. It wasn't long, though, before she felt it, an oppressive presence, as if unseen eyes were watching her every move. She shook off the feeling and continued her work, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. She ventured deeper and deeper into the church, her curiosity piqued by a staircase leading down to the basement. As she went down the stairs, she noticed the basement was dark and cold, the air thick with the smell of damp and decay. Claire's flashlight cast long, flickering shadows on the walls. As she explored, she found remnants of the church's past, broken pews, rotting hymnals, and cracked altars. But it was the far corner of the basement that drew her attention. There, half buried under debris, was an old wooden chest. Its iron lock was rusted and brittle. With some effort, she pried it open, revealing a collection of old manuscripts and a large ornate crucifix. Claire carefully lifted the crucifix, its surface cold and strangely sticky. As she held it, a chill ran down her spine. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop further. The oppressive feeling intensified, and she heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, yet unmistakable. She spun around, the beam of her flashlight cutting through the darkness. There was no one there, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. She could make out words now, fragmented phrases that spoke of betrayal and vengeance. Panic surged within her, and she backed away, clutching the crucifix like a lifeline. The whispers turned into a harsh discordance, filling her mind with dread. She stumbled towards the stairs, desperate to escape the basement. As she reached the top, she felt the same presence envelop her and stop her, just as she watched the door slam shut with a deafening bang, plunging her into complete darkness. The presence, now gone, allowed Claire to reach the door. She began to pound, screaming for help, but the whispers, growing in intensity, drowned out her cries. She felt something brush against her leg, cold and clammy, and she recoiled in terror. The basement was alive with shadows, moving and writhing as if they had a will of their own. In her frantic search for an exit, she tripped over the chest, falling hard onto the stone floor. The crucifix slipped from her grasp, skittering across the floor, and coming to rest at the feet of a shadowy figure that materialized before her. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its mouth moved in a silent chant. The figure reached out, and Claire felt an icy grip around her throat. Her vision blurred, and her strength ebbed away. In a final desperate act, she reached for the crucifix, but the shadowy figure kicked it aside. Its cold laughter filled the air. Just as her consciousness began to fade, a blinding light filled the basement. The shadowy figure recoiled, its form disintegrating into wisps of darkness. Claire gasped for air, her vision clearing to reveal an elderly man standing in the doorway, holding a lantern that burned with an ethereal flame. The man helped her to her feet, his eyes filled with concern. He introduced himself as Father O'Reilly, the last remaining guardian of St. Mary's secrets. He explained that the church had been cursed, its congregation doomed to eternal torment by an ancient evil that had been unleashed in its hallowed halls. Claire listened in stunned silence, her ordeal finally making sense. With the priest's help, she left the church, vowing never to return. Her photos of the abandoned St. Mary's remained untouched, a haunting reminder of the darkness she had encountered. If you've lasted this long, then we'll go on to our third story. This time we're going all the way to the frozen wildernesses of northern Canada, where the locals speak of an ancient, terrifying creature that roams the forest. This is the Wendigo's call. It was a bitterly cold winter when Liam decided to venture into the Canadian wilderness. An experienced outdoorsman, Liam was in search of a remote, untouched part of the forest for a documentary he was filming. He had heard of the legends of the Wendigo, but like many, he dismissed them as mere folklore. Liam set up a camp near an isolated lake, surrounded by dense, snow-covered trees. The air was still, and the silence of the forest was profound. As the sun set, he built a fire, its warmth a welcome reprieve from the bittering cold. He began recording his thoughts, describing the beauty and isolation of the landscape. Liam goes on to say, "Day 1 in the wilderness. The silence here is almost deafening, but it's incredibly peaceful. No signs of life, except for a few small animal tracks. This place feels untouched by time." As night fell though, the temperature plummeted further. Liam bundled up in his tent, the fire outside casting dancing shadows on the canvas. He was just starting to drift off to sleep when he heard it, a distant, eerie call, like a mournful wail carried on the wind. Liam sat up, heart pounding. He listened intently, but the sound didn't come again. Shaking it off as the wind, he laid back down, but sleep eluded him, and soon the call echoed through the forest once more, closer this time. Determined to find the source, Liam grabbed his flashlight and stepped out into the freezing night. The forest was unnervingly quiet, the only sound his crunching footsteps on the snow. He followed the direction of the call, which seemed to beckon him deeper into the woods. After what felt like hours, Liam stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin, half buried in snow. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a dark interior. Inside, the air was thick with decay. Old, broken furniture lay scattered, and strange symbols were carved into the walls. In the center of the room, Liam found a journal, much like the one in the story of Blackwood Cabin. He opened it and began to read. The journal belonged to a man named Samuel, a fur trapper who had lived there over a century ago. Samuel wrote of a harsh winter, of starvation and desperation. The final entry spoke of a creature, a Wendigo, that haunted the forest, preying on those who succumbed to cannibalism in their desperation. Liam's breath caught in his throat as he read the last entry, which said, "The Wendigo calls. I hear it in my dreams, feel it in my bones. It is coming for me. God help anyone who reads this." Suddenly, the temperature in the cabin dropped even further, and Liam felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The mournful wail echoed again, this time directly outside the cabin. He spun around, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. In the doorway stood a figure, tall and emaciated, with sunken eyes and a twisted skeletal frame. It was the Wendigo, its eyes glowing with a malevolent hunger, and its breath came out in ragged, frost-filled clouds. Liam's blood ran cold as he realized the creature from the legends was real. Liam stumbled backwards, heart racing. The Wendigo stepped closer, its eyes never leaving his. In a desperate attempt to save himself, Liam grabbed the journal and hurled it at the creature. The Wendigo snarled, momentarily distracted, giving Liam the chance to flee. He ran through the forest. The Wendigo's wail echoed behind him, urging him to run faster. The cold bit at his skin, and the branches clawed at his clothes, but he didn't stop, didn't look back, driven by pure terror to keep moving forward. When he finally reached his campsite, Liam grabbed his gear and bolted to his truck. He sped away, leaving the haunted forest behind. He never spoke of what he encountered, but the footage he captured in those woods told a chilling tale. So if you ever find yourself in the northern Canadian wilderness, heed the warning of the locals. And when you hear the Wendigo's call, run and don't look back. Thank you for joining us tonight on Whispers from the Campfire. Until next time, stay safe and keep the fire burning.